Welcome to my 251st video on my work with OO gauge. This video will feature my take on Hornby's model of the LMS Turbomotive, brand new for fall 2023. I don't buy a great many newly released models. Partially this is because I really enjoy working or playing with older models, especially those with real character of their own, such as Hornby Turbomotive. But perhaps a greater factor is that I do focus fairly specifically on modelling LMS operations before the Second World War, around the time that my grandfather's career with that company was coming to an end, and not an awful lot of new models applicable to my particular interests have been coming out recently. But of course the LMS Turbomotive sits right in the centre of my area of interest, so when Hornby announced in January 2022 that they would be bringing out a brand new OO gauge model of the Turbomotive, I immediately put in a pre-order for it, despite its high price. Now, my ordering process ended up becoming rather complex. I put in my pre-order through British Model Trains in Cambridge, Ontario. Nigel Doran of British Model Trains has always been very helpful to me, and even apart from that I believe that it's always good to support our local dealers whenever possible. However, whilst we were waiting for the Hornby Turbomotive to come out, the Canadian importer for Hornby went out of business. My order had been put in through that importer, so it basically disappeared. Nigel tried to get some sort of useful response out of the main Hornby sales department, but I gather that so far he's failed to get any useful response re future Hornby sales in Canada. So he managed to get me this model through his ordering arrangements with GaugeMaster. This still leaves many questions re the future of Hornby sales in Canada unanswered. For example, is there any chance that Hornby will honour warranty arrangements regarding all of the new Hornby stock that Nigel has on hand or has recently sold, that was bought through the now defunct importer? In any case, I got my Turbomotive not long after the model first became available in the UK for a price in Canadian dollars equivalent to just under £240, plus Canadian sales tax, of course, since I bought it from a Canadian dealer. The RRP on Hornby's site for this model is now £266.49. This makes it definitely the most expensive new locomotive that I've ever bought, although I did pay even more for a Wren Royal Scot converted for 3-rail running. Is it worth it? Well, of course you have to consider what else you should be spending your money on, but in general I'd sort of lean to saying, well, let me put it like this, I don't really feel cheated. This is an impressive model. On the other hand, it is unfortunate that new models overall are becoming so expensive as to discourage entry to the hobby. Anyway, before I get into a detailed review of the new Hornby model, I want to go into the history of the Turbomotive in the real world a bit. The Turbomotive was created by modifying a member of William Staniyer's first Pacific class for the LMS, the Princess Royal class. The Turbomotive was created from the third member of the Princess Royal class to be built, numbered 6202. The Turbomotive did not carry a nameplate as it was run as a turbine-driven engine. The principle of the Turbomotive was to drive the locomotive via steam turbines rather than via reciprocating pistons as in a conventional steam engine. As such, the Turbomotive had no cylinders and no valve gear, no crossheads and no driving rods. The locomotive was fitted with 2 steam turbines, a full-length one on the left side of the engine for forward motion and a short turbine on the right side for reverse operation. The turbines drove the wheels via gears. A steam-operated dog clutch was used to switch between the forward and reverse turbines. By the time that the Turbomotive was created in 1935, it was the norm for marine steam engines to operate via turbines. That worked very well for ships, but there were some issues in attempting to apply the principle to a railway locomotive, although the principle had been tried before, notably in Sweden. Why was this even considered? Turbines will tend to be more efficient than piston engines, as they have no reciprocating parts. In a conventional steam engine, the pistons and their associated parts are constantly accelerated, then brought to a stop, and then accelerated in the reverse direction, over and over again. This requires energy, which detracts from the power actually available for driving the wheels. Also, conventional steam engines, because of the way that they apply power in bursts based on the repeated opening and closing of valves, produce a hammer blow effect, which increases the wear on the track. In a turbine-driven engine, the power is applied smoothly and there is no hammer blow. So in summary, a turbine-driven locomotive will tend to burn less coal for an equivalent run and will impose less wear on the track. On the other hand, turbines do not work very efficiently when the pressure driving them is throttled back. In order to get around this problem, the turbomotive did not adjust its power by simply throttling the flow of steam through the whole turbine. Rather, the forward turbine consisted of 18 rows of turbine blades, and steam flow to drive each set of blades was controlled by a separate valve. So power was increased or decreased by supplying pressurized steam to more or less sets of blades, maintaining a more or less even steam pressure as far as possible. This illustration is from an old magazine, and I have to say I have some doubts about the accuracy of some of the details in this illustration. Here's the turbomotive in operation fairly early in its career, I believe. The engine's seen here from the right side, and so only the short reversing turbine is visible. Here's another view of the turbomotive as built, very much a Princess Royal locomotive, other than for the absence of cylinders and their associated valve operation and drive gear. No major changes were required to elements such as the firebox and the boiler, and a standard tender was used. A standard double chimney and double blast pipe were employed. Here's a picture of the turbomotive running at speed. A bit blurry, but it's interesting to see how the steam comes from the chimney and vents underneath. Because only a short 4-blade turbine was fitted for reversing, the turbomotive was only able to move in reverse quite slowly and with minimal power, so it could only pull rolling stock when going forwards. Thus it was always necessary to turn the engine to the correct direction before coupling it with a train. Here you can see the turbomotive being turned on a table onto which it barely fits. At some point in its career, I'm not sure exactly when, the turbomotive was fitted with smoke deflectors, and it's seen here with those deflectors sometime after the war. The turbomotive continued to operate with the LMS right up until nationalisation in 1948, almost exclusively pulling passenger expresses on the Western Main Line. The turbomotive did fulfill its design objectives of reducing coal usage and removing hammer blow to the track. However, the advantages were not seen as significant enough as against additional maintenance issues, etc., for any other experiments with turbine-driven locos to be attempted by the LMS. So, the turbomotive was a successful experiment as far as it went, but not successful enough to actually alter the general course of railway history. Here's the only picture that I could find of the turbomotive being worked on, here at Crew Works, with the front cover removed from the reversing turbine. This picture was apparently taken before the smoke deflectors were fitted. Very shortly after nationalisation in 1949, the turbomotive suffered a major turbine failure. It was not felt economical, especially in the climate of post-war austerity, to attempt to reconstruct the turbine, and so it was decided to rebuild the locomotive as a more standard member of the Princess Royal class, using new frames and cylinders. The rebuild was not completed until 1952, at which time the locomotive went back into service with British Railways and was given the name Princess Anne. Very sadly, after only 2 months in service after the rebuild, Princess Anne was involved in the terrible rail accident at Harrow and Wealdstone, in which 112 people lost their lives and many more were injured. Princess Anne was deemed damaged beyond repair. A tragic postscript to the turbomotive story. It isn't long at all since Hornby released a newly tooled model of the Princess Royal class, as R3999, which came out in 2021. I did buy one of those, and here it is, and you can see video of it in part 71 of this series. I believe that substantial elements of this tooling were reused in the newly released Turbomotive model. Finally, here is my Turbomotive, or at least the box that it came in, a solid and handsome box at that. I don't do DCC myself, but for those who do, you can see that this new model is fitted with a 21-pin DCC connection, whereas my R3999 had an 8-pin socket. Here's the side of the box with some information about the prototype and some drawings. Here's a closer view of those drawings on the side of the box, dated 2022, as you'd expect. On the other side of the box is a larger line drawing of the model. There was nothing really significant on the bottom of the box. Here's the end of the box showing the exact version that I got. The model is also available in a lined BR black livery, as it briefly ran after nationalisation. Both liveries are also available in sound-fitted versions for an RRP of £312.99. I found it quite difficult to open the box. The lid fitted very tightly and it was hard to get it started to move, and even after that it took a good bit of wiggling end to end to get it off. Inside the box, the model was in its block of ice, surrounded by black foam on all sides. This type of modern packaging really does protect models much better than older arrangements with styrofoam, etc., which Hornby still seem to use for some of their cheaper offerings. The instructions came in the form of a simple two-sided sheet. Here's one side. Note the instructions at top left, returning the light on the rear of the tender on and off. I'll demonstrate that shortly. Here's the other side of the instruction sheet, covering lubrication, very standard, fitting of extra parts, and DCC fitting. Oddly enough, the DCC socket is in the loco, perhaps because too many wires would be required between loco and tender for all functions if the socket were in the tender. Here's the detail pack: brake rigging, a NEM coupling for the front, a chain link coupling, optional steps, flanged wheels for the pony truck, and crew figures. It's nice that painted crew figures are included, but shouldn't that almost be standard now for such expensive models? The pony truck comes fitted with flangeless wheels to enable the model to get round set track curves. Fitting the flanged wheels in this pack would doubtless limit operation on set track. Inside its block of ice, the model was draped in soft plastic sheet to protect it. Finally, here is an unobstructed view of the model. And here, out of the block of ice on its side, in some ways the model is simpler than the recent Hornby Princess Royal, since only simple conrods are required with no cylinders or valve gear. Unfortunately, the new Hornby Turbomotive model uses the old way of connecting loco and tender, with wires plugged into the tender separate from the drawbar. Hornby have now come up with something better than this, as seen on recent models such as the P2, where the drawbar itself contains the required electrical connections, with sections of the drawbar on the loco and tender simply plugging into each other, and no separate wires between loco and tender required. I assume that this newer, better arrangement was not used on the Turbomotive model in order to keep costs down by reusing as much of the 2021 Princess Royal tooling as possible. Still rather a shame. But at least this Hornby arrangement is better than the way Bachmann do it, with the drawbar just hooking over a pin on the tender, from which it tends to constantly come disconnected, leaving the loco to pull its train by the wires. That won't happen here, as the drawbar is screwed in place at both ends. There are two holes in the drawbar at the loco end. You can put the screw through the other hole for closer connection between loco and tender, if it will run on your curves okay that way. Here's the front part of the loco on the side with the short reversing turbine. Although there's no valve gear, there are very fine pipes running near the running plate, and the handrails are very fine, so care does need to be taken when handling the model. Here's the other side with the full-length main turbine. I was generally impressed with the finish and appearance of the model. I didn't notice any assembly defects on mine. As noted, the wheels that come fitted to the pony truck have no flanges. This does allow for greater realism in the pipework etc. in this area, while still allowing the model to get round set track curves. It does, however, result in the pony truck overhanging the track rather awkwardly on curves, as you may see shortly. The tender is well modelled with quite a nice coal load, very much the same tender as with the 2021 Princess Royal model. Here's the top of the loco with the 4 metal safety valves and the whistle. The vent on top of the cab does open and close, but it's rather cockeyed here. The cab windows are nicely glazed. Here's the front of the loco, all very neatly modelled with a nice fine grille, which I think is separately fitted. There is a chain link coupling in the detail pack that can be fitted to the hole in the front buffer beam. Alternatively, a front NEM coupling can be fitted, but that's really redundant as the Turbomotive couldn't pull rolling stock in reverse. You can also see here what is perhaps one of the more controversial features of this model. Lamps are fitted to the front, and these light up when the model runs. Well, with DCC you can turn them on and off via that. There's also a lamp on the rear of the tender, and that also lights up. The tender light can be turned off without DCC by tapping the sides of the tender at the back. The buffers are sprung, as you'd expect with such an expensive model. Generally, the back of the tender is quite impressive, with very finely printed plates, fine rivet work, and nice fine handrails. Perhaps one of the most impressive features of this model is that the boiler is made of metal, making the model very solid and heavy. Here it is on my scale. It's sitting on a piece of 003 rail track, as the model was too big to fit onto the scale otherwise. The scale has been zeroed to take out the weight of the track piece, so 588 grams is the weight of the loco plus tender. Over 1 pound 4 ounces for those of us who still find that easier to judge. I got the model onto my test track for an initial check. It ran fine in both directions with relatively little power, once I realised that its initial refusal to run was because I'd inadvertently kicked out the mains plug of the controller. Being a brand new model, my Turbomotive required running in. I got it onto my upstairs Hornby 2-rail layout for this purpose. It's a rather tricky model to rail. Pushing down on the back of the loco will tend to derail the tender, and the front bogie tends to go all over the place as you try to rail it. The aid of a railer is definitely helpful. You can see here how the flangeless wheels on the pony truck overhang the track on curves. This is on a 3rd radius curve. I got out my baby monitor for the running in, as I'm too impatient to stand for an hour watching a loco running in. The model derailed after about 5 minutes of forward running. I heard it on the baby monitor and ran in to check. It had derailed just about in this place on the track, with the front of the loco coming off the tracks and hitting the signal seen at left here. I thought it was a bit odd that the loco would derail after it had already been running round for 5 minutes without problems. It did another 25 minutes of forward running and 30 minutes of backward running without any more problems. I did notice that the model seemed to run markedly slower in reverse, which would be prototypical, but I doubt it was deliberate. I took the model down to the bench. I wanted to fit the supplied crew figures, and I also wanted to run the model on the rolling road to demonstrate the lighting features. When I had the model upside down in the servicing cradle, I noticed that one of the sanding tubes was significantly bent out of place, the one at back left here. I strongly suspect this is what caused the derailment during running in. The sanding tubes are made of very stiff wire, strong enough to make breakage unlikely, but also strong enough to derail the loco should they catch on something. I've had other models that were derailed by their sanding tubes on first running. The Bachmann Midland 3F, I think, was one such. I did my best to bend that sanding tube wire back into a more proper position. Not all that easy to do, as they don't bend easily. To fit the crew, I really needed to separate loco and tender. Hornby sell a special tool for pulling out these plugs, but I don't have it and just use tweezers. With the wires unplugged from the tender, I undid the screw holding the drawbar at the loco end. Here's about the best I could manage as a picture of the cab interior. It's a bit hard to get at, with the roof reaching far back and the cab doors fixed in place. The interior of the cab, when you can manage to see it, is really impressive, with some separately fitted controls and gauge face details. The firebox is open, as there's an LED for firebox glow. Here are the crew figures that came with the model. A bit odd, really. I would say that both of these figures look like drivers, but I suppose the firemen can sit down some of the time. The cab doors are rigidly fixed in place, folded like that, and the seats provided for the crew are just very small shelves protruding from the sides of the cab, so fitting the crew is tricky. I did my best, but with the small seats it was hard to get the crew figures into very natural-looking positions. I stuck the figures to the seats using 3-in-1 glue, as I wanted to allow for some possible adjustment. I reconnected the loco and tender, plugging the wires back in. I was a bit afraid that my crew figures might fall off their seats while I had the model upside down, but the 3-in-1 glue held. Here's the model with the crew after reconnection. I wish those cab doors could be adjusted a bit, but they seem fixed the way they are. I got the model onto my rolling road, mainly in hopes this would make it easier to demonstrate the lighting features. Okay, let me just see if I can demonstrate the Turbomotive on the rolling road, which I'm doing. Clock's chiming. It's only the half hour, so they shouldn't time too much. Mainly I wanted to do this to show the lights and things working more readily. Okay, which way are we going? We're going forwards. Okay, so that's going forwards. It's got very bright lights on the front when it's going forwards. Very bright white lights, and a less bright but still quite noticeable red light on the back. And you can see the firebox glow in the tender there. So there's your firebox glow, your red backlight, and your white front lights. Now if we stop it and then we run it in reverse, now you've got two red lights on the front. Well, that's interesting. In the viewfinder of the camera they look more white, but they look very red to me in real life. I don't know, we'll see how they come out on the video. They look thoroughly deep red to me, but they look much whiter, I think. And this, on the other hand, that one's definitely white now, the one on the back of the tender, and we still have the firebox glow working. Now, supposedly, we shall see. Let's just turn it off a minute, I don't know. Supposedly, if you sort of tap, oh, famous last words, I hit something else, but if we tap on the tender like that, we're supposed to be able to turn the tender light on and off. Oh, yes. See there, the tender light is now off, yes. It's there, but it's not on. And if we tap again, it's a bit awkward to do, but no, I can't get it. Oh, there we go. There we go. Some sort of tapping on the tender will cause the tender light to turn on and off. It's a bit fiddly to do, I find, but anyway, there you go. So there's your lighting features demonstrated, and it does seem to run fine on the rolling road, and so it should, because it's already been running. I'm none too sure about the illuminated lamps, really. It sort of shows willing on the part of Hornby to attempt more sophisticated features, but steam locomotives really didn't run with bright white lights shining out the front. In fact, I don't think that lamps were even lighted for normal daytime running, and even if the lamps were lighted, they wouldn't shine out brightly the way those on the model do. The arrangement of the lamps on the front reflects the standard lamp code for an express passenger train, which would, of course, have been how the Turbomotive would have generally been running. A third lamp is provided in the detail pack, and that can be fitted to the top of the smoke box. But that would be a bit pointless, as no code involves 3 lamps fitted like that, and the pre-fitted lamps are not removable, I don't think. Anyway, I'll now finish with a little running video of my Turbomotive on my basement 00 gauge layout, which is built with Bachmann Easy Track. Okay, let me see if I can show you this new Hornby Turbomotive model running with a bunch of coaches I thought we'd run it, I'd run it on the, this is the downstairs layout I'm running it on here, which is a little bit different. This is built with Bachmann Easy Track. And I believe the curves are second radius it was running in, with the third radius curves upstairs. We'll see what we can do. I do not have a handheld controller for this, so I've got to get down to control it at a decent speed. Whoa, sorry. You can see those white lights. I mean, I'm a bit dubious about those, I have to say. I mean, I don't think it's particularly prototypical to see shiny white lights in daylight on the front of a steam engine like that, but whatever. They're a feature, but I'm not sure whether they're a very sensible feature. I've turned off the backlight on the tender, which makes sense because of course you wouldn't be running with a backlight on the tender. Seems to be slowing down, if anything. I don't know why. I don't want to make it go too fast, though. So long as it keeps moving, I'm inclined to leave it, because when I've got to bend down to change the speed, it's awkward to do, and I'd rather it was going a bit too slow than a bit too fast, honestly. See if I can capture the firebox glow. It definitely does seem to slow down a bit, doesn't it? I don't know why. Can we see the firebox glow? Not well, yeah, just about there. Yeah, there you can see it. You can see it as it goes around the corner. You can see those two crew members I put on. Let me see. It's an impressive engine, there's no doubt about that. Let all of the coaches go by and then we'll catch up again with the engine. These are old Hornby coaches actually. They're not all that suitable really for running with this, I suppose. They've got the old D couplings on them, which don't couple all that well to the modern narrow couplings, but so far we seem to be managing. So yeah, an impressive model in its way, no doubt about it. I turned it down a bit now, so there's a reason it's slowing down even more now. Oh, blimey, no, I don't want to actually stop it there. Let's bring it round. Oh, I don't know. I don't know. Yeah. Just trying to bring it round to where you can at least see it properly. So there you go. A fairly impressive model. Definitely one of the most expensive I've ever bought. I think the Bachmann Precedent was almost as expensive, and for that matter my Wren Royal Scot was as well, but is it worth the money? I don't know, I couldn't resist it. It's an impressive example of LMS engineering, I guess.